Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Arcserve webinar. Today's webinar is the first of a new three-part series looking at some of the key features and capabilities in Arcserve UDP version 6. Today we'll be focusing on bare metal and granular restore. My name is Armin Jihanian. I'm the pre-sales consultant for Arcserve, and I'll be delivering today's session. Before we get started, if you have any questions during today's session, please use the chat or questions pane to type your questions in, and we'll address those and answer those towards the end of the session. So today we'll take a very quick look at the backup and restore at a high level with Arcserve UDP. And the bulk of the session will be dedicated to performing a few different demos. We'll take a look at how to perform a bare metal restore. We'll look at doing file and folder restores, both using our restore wizard, as well as using a method called mounting a recovery point. We'll look at how to restore a SQL database and Exchange database, and we'll also look at restoring Exchange items such as individual emails, calendar items, contacts, and more. And we'll also take a look at how to do Active Directory object and object attribute restores. From a backup perspective, Arcserve UDP is a block-level volume-based backup. So it lets us back up individual volumes, or we can back up all the volumes of an entire system. With Arcserve UDP, we can have up to 1,440 recovery points or backups per server. And this is across daily, weekly, monthly, or custom backups. So we can set up a schedule based on what the business requirements are, and we can have up to 1,440 backups. When we perform a backup with Arcserve UDP, we actually send the backup to a file share, such as on a NAS or file server. We can back up to a separate hard drive, which, for example, might be an external USB-based hard drive. We can also send backups to a data store on a recovery point server or an Arcserve UDP appliance. From a restore perspective, we can do granular restore or entire system restore, which is what we'll be looking at today. And we support restores to dissimilar hardware. So we can restore from one make or model to another, and we'll see how we can achieve that. And of course, we have application support for Exchange, SQL, and Active Directory if you're using the Arcserve UDP appliance, or if you're using Arcserve UDP Advanced Edition or higher. When restoring, we have, as we mentioned, a number of different restore options available. If you want to do a bare metal restore to restore an entire system, we need to first create an Arcserve UDP recovery image. And this can be a recovery ISO or a recovery USB stick. We then load this on the system that we're restoring to, and from that we can then pull a backup to perform a full system restore. For granular file and folder restores or for application data restores, these can be achieved through the use of the Arcserve UDP agent. So we can do a wizard-based restore of files and folders, or we can mount a recovery point, which I touched on before. When we mount a recovery point, we're essentially putting the backup image and mounting it as a drive letter. So it appears like a local disk, and we can search for files, open files, copy files using our standard applications such as Windows Explorer. And then with the application data, as I said, we'll take a look at how we can do database and item level restores and AD restores as well. So without much further ado, let's get straight into the demo side of things. So what I'm going to do first is open the Arcserve UDP console. So if I open the console and I'll log in, when we first log into the Arcserve UDP console, we'll see the dashboard screen. I covered this briefly in the previous Arcserve UDP basic series, so I won't be spending too much time going through this. But I do want to go to the Resources tab here, and this shows me all the servers that I have in my environment. And you can see that these have green ticks, meaning that I have had successful backups with these machines. Now, if I'm looking to do granular restore, file folder restores, and so on, I can tick those off through the UDP console here. Before I get into that, I do want to show how we do a bare metal restore first. So in order to do a bare metal restore, as I said, we need to create a UDP recovery image first. Now, the way we do that is using a machine that has the Arcserve UDP agent installed on it. So this screen we're looking at here, I'm running obviously on my local machine. And if we take a look in the taskbar, this icon down here with this green tick shows the Arcserve UDP agent icon. So what I can do is I can right-click on this tray icon, and then if I go to Advanced, and then to Create Bootkit, that will launch the wizard to create the recovery image. So I'll click on that. And then I might just minimize the console window behind here. So when we launch the bare metal recovery wizard, we can see that we have three options. We can create images for Windows 10, Windows 8 or 8.1, and Windows 7. Now we'll need to create different images based on the operating system that we'll be restoring. So if you wanted to restore an image of a server running Windows 2012 R2, for example, you'll need at least a Windows 8 or 8.1 image. On top of that, you'll notice that there is some text here saying you are required to download and install Windows ADK, the Assessment and Deployment Kit. So if you have that already installed, we can progress. So I'm going to create a Windows 8.1 image because I might want to restore Windows 2012 R2 as an example. And then I can click Next. If you don't have the Windows ADK installed, instead of seeing this screen, you'll actually see a window with a link that lets you download the ADK and install it. Once it's installed, like it is on this machine, you'll have the option to create either the ISO image or a USB stick. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the BMR ISO image in this case, and we'll go to the next screen. And here we have the option of generating the image for 32-bit or 64-bit platforms, or for both. So I'm going to choose both of those options, and then here we'll choose where we're going to save that image. So I might want to save this on my desktop as an example. And then we'll go OK. And then underneath, you're going to give the file name to the ISO image. So I'm going to keep that default name there. When we go next, we then choose what language support we want in the restore image. So I'm going to select English and go next. And then at this point, we can choose to include specific drivers in the image. So if you are going to be performing restores on a standardized hardware platform, you might want to include network drivers, or you might want to include RAID controller drivers and the like. If you're doing restores on virtual machines, such as VMware machines, you might include the VMware drivers as an example. There's an option here to click. If you click Include Local Drivers, it will add all the drivers on the local machine you're adding here. So here we can see we've got some drivers that have been added in. If you want to add a specific driver that's not already installed, we can click on Add Driver button here. We can then browse to where the driver is and add that driver in. If you've added the wrong one, we can just go ahead and we can delete the drivers. It's also worth noting that the recovery ISO will always have some default Windows drivers included. So I'm going to go ahead with the default drivers. Once you're done, you can hit Create, and it'll go ahead and start creating that image. Now, in the interest of time, and like they say on the cooking shows, here's one I prepared earlier. So if I go to my file server here, you can see I have a number of recovery ISOs, and I've actually got versions, the 3 different versions that are available, Windows 7, 8.1, and 10, already created here. So once we've got the recovery ISO, what we need to do is have access to the machine we want to restore the image to. Now, for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to connect to a virtual machine. So I'm just going to open a remote desktop to a Hyper-V machine. Here I've already created a VM called BMR Demo, and if I open this up, I've already got the ISO mounted to this machine. So if I click on Start VM, you can see here that the VM is started up, and I'm given the option to use either the 64-bit or the 32-bit platform. Because I'm restoring a Windows 2012 R2 image, I'll be going ahead with the 64-bit ISO or the 64-bit platform. So I can either wait for the timeout or I can hit Enter to load the 64-bit machine there. So what it's doing now is it's loading files so that it can start the Windows PE environment. So it's gotten this set up for Windows PE from the Windows ADK that we required. So it'll take a few seconds for the Windows environment to start. So we can see here, once it starts, we can choose the language that we want to use. So we've got English here, and my keyboard is a US layout, so I can leave that as is. And I'll click Next. So after a few seconds, we'll actually have a screen that lets us choose where we're going to restore from. So we can see here we have 2 options. We have the option to restore from an Arcserve Unified Data Protection backup. So this is if you've performed the backup and you have a recovery point or a backup image and you want to use that as your source. You select that first radio button. Underneath, there's an option to recover from a virtual machine. This option lets you use a VM that was used for either Arcserve UDP Virtual Standby or Arcserve UDP Instant VM as the source. We'll be actually talking about Virtual Standby and Instant VM in an upcoming webinar, but for this example, we'll be using a backup as our source, so I'll be keeping the first option selected and clicking Next. Now, while this is doing this detection, I want to draw your attention to the bottom left of the window here. You can see that one network adapter has been detected, and that's a Hyper-V network adapter. It has an IP address assigned to it, and you can see that the network is connected. Now, if I'm doing a restore from a file share, or if I want to do a restore from an Arcserve UDP appliance or a recovery point server, I need to make sure that I have my machine on the network. So if there were no network adapters detected, what I can do is I can click on this Utilities button, and I can click on the load driver utility. So if I click on this, I get the, I guess, mini device manager type window, and I can expand the different devices that are here. And then when I select the device, I can choose to install the driver. Now the main drivers you'd want to install are going to be network adapters as well as disk controllers. So if you have a different RAID controller or disk controller, you can expand these and choose to install particular drivers. In this example, my network adapter is detected and I'm using the standard disk controller, so there's no issues with my drivers. So I'll click on close. And the other thing to mention is if it does have an incorrect IP address, we can click on Utility and we can click on the network configuration entry here. And here we can customize the IP address details and the DNS details so that we can use, if we need to change it, we can use those particular configuration details. Again, in my case, the address that's been handed out to it is fine. So I'm going to hit cancel on this. And now what we can do is define the source recovery point or the source backup that we want to use for the restore. To do that, we click on the Browse button here, and we have two options. We can choose to access either a local disk, like a USB drive where the backup image is, or we can connect to a NAS or a file share to get access to the backup image. Or we can connect to a recovery point server, such as the UDP appliance or a recovery point server with a data store. In my example, in my lab, I've backed up to a recovery point server, so I'm going to go ahead and select that item here. I then need to provide the host and credentials. And once I've put the details in, I can hit connect. And you can see here, after connecting, it's showing this data store. It's called RPS01-DS01. And if I expand this out, it'll actually show the list of all the servers that have backups in this data store. So you can see I've got quite a number of machines that are backed up here. I want to do a restore of this demo 01 machine, so I'll click on that, and then I'll click OK. At this point, you can see that demo 01 is listed in the backup machines up here, and in the bottom section, I have a list of different recovery points or different backups that are available. So I can choose different backups to use as the source. So here I can see I might want to choose my 8:35 a.m. backup. And on the right, when I select different recovery points, it gives me some information about it. It tells me what volumes have been backed up, whether the data is encrypted, and so on. Once I'm happy and I've chosen the recovery point as the source, I can click Next. And then I've got the option of choosing Express mode or Advanced mode. If I choose Express mode, the system will automatically recover my image to the first drive it detects, will create the partitions and everything for me automatically. If I choose Advanced mode, I have a bit more control. I can manually create partitions, delete partitions. I can choose whether I want to restore everything or not. I'm a big fan of using Advanced mode, and even though it says Advanced mode, it's still pretty easy to use. So let's select Advanced mode and go Next. We get a warning saying that if we continue, we might lose all data on the machine we're restoring to, which makes sense because we'll be overriding the data on that disk. So I'm happy with that. I'll go yes. And then here it'll detect what local disks are available and what's on the backup image. So the top section here shows what disks are on this VM. So I have one disk, which is this 127 gig disk, and underneath I have the backup image, which contains this disk backup, which has two partitions, system reserved and a C, and that's what's going to be restored up here. You can see that these are ticked. So that's a system reserved is going to be restored here, and the C drive is going to be restored here. There are other operations you can do. So in this drop-down, we can reset what partitions there are. Alternatively, I can right-click on different partitions, and I might want to resize or delete these volumes. You'll see there are options to create partitions and the like as well. So Advanced gives us the ability to do these customizations. In this case, I'm happy with the way things are mapped, and I can click on Next. So here it's telling me it's going to restore system reserve and C drive on disk 0. Once I'm happy with that, I'll click OK. And you can see here it's now started doing the restore. I have a progress for each of the petitions. I have options to automatically reboot after the restore is done. I can choose not to start agents, and so on. There are some more details on how to do authoritative restores if you're doing a restore to a domain controller, and that's all outlined in further detail in the Arcserve UDP documentation. But for now, I'm going to let this do a restore in the background, and I'll let it automatically, I won't let it reboot, just so that I don't get a conflict on my network. And I'll let that run. So that's how we do a bare metal restore. So the next thing we want to take a look at is how to do an individual file or folder restore. So to do that, we're going to open the UDP console again. Say, for example, I want to do a restore of a file on my file server. The way I can do that is I can right-click on that file server, and I can then click on the Restore menu item. What this does is it will open the UDP agent on that particular machine. Now, if I wanted to, I could access and open the agent directly, or if I'm actually on the machine, I can right-click on the UDP icon, such as in this example, I've got my UDP icon down here. If I right-click on that, I have a Restore menu option here, which would open the agent as well. For now, I'm looking at the agent on my file server, which you can see here in the address bar at the top. It says File 01. And then if I want to do a restore of a file or folder using the Restore wizard, I can do Browse Recovery Points, or I can click on Find Files. Let's start with Browse Recovery Points. If I click on this, you can see here that it's looking at File 01 backups, and you can see here in the calendar view, the green days show where backups are available. Let's say I want to restore data from last Friday. So I can click on the 22nd, and then you can see here there's a backup that happened at 11 p.m. And I have a C drive, D drive, and system reserve petition that were backed up. If I want to restore data from my D drive, for example, I can click on the D to expand it. And what this will do is it will open up the contents of D, and for example, I might expand my software folder and choose particular folders to do a restore from. So I might want to click on that folder to do a restore, and then I can click Next. And at this point, I can choose to either restore to its original location, or I can restore to a different location. So I can, if I want to restore to a different share or something, I can put a particular path in here. I might just do original location here. And then I can choose, if there's an existing file, how to resolve the conflict. Do I override it? Do I rename it? Do I skip it? And so on. Once I've made my selection, I can click Next. And then I have a summary screen. I can review the setting. And once I'm happy with that, if I click Finish, it will start the restore. I won't actually do that just now. I'll click on cancel. The other way we can do a restore with the wizard is for searching for a file or folder. And we'll do that again. We'll open that restore window. And instead of choosing browse recovery point, we're going to click on find files or folders to restore. I'm going to click on that. This time round, instead of seeing that calendar view, we've actually got the details of the server, which is file 01 here, that we're looking to do a restore from. And then underneath, we can choose to search all the available recovery points, or we can limit our search between a certain date range. So if we have yesterday's date, for example, there's our backup at 11 p.m. Maybe if I want to go earlier than that, I might, if I filter from a week ago, I have more recovery points, more backups available to do a search from. So let's say, for example, we're searching just yesterday's. You can then choose the recovery point to search and go next. At this point, if you have not performed the cataloging of the backup, this window will pop up and it will tell you that without a catalog, your search might take a longer time. And it gives you the option to either do a catalog or not. If you click yes, you'll be able to continue searching without doing a catalog job. If you click no, it will cancel the restore and it will start doing a cataloging. And then once the cataloging is finished, you can run the restore wizard again. For this example, I don't want to do a catalog job, so I'm happy to continue, albeit maybe a bit slower. So I'll click on yes to continue. Now at this point, I can choose what I'm going to search for. So let's use that 7-zip folder as an example. And the search path was going to be, I think, somewhere in the software, if I'm not mistaken. So I can limit my search path so that it doesn't search every volume and every folder. And if I hit find, I'm hoping it'll come up relatively quickly. So it's just mounting the recovery point in the background. There we can see it's found that 7-zip folder. So if I wanted to restore this, I can then click next. I have the same options on how to restore, whether to the original location or to a different location. And if I have an existing file name, whether I'm going to overwrite, rename, or skip. If I click next, I then have the same summary. And when I click finish, it'll perform the actual restore. So that's how we can do an individual file or folder restore, or multiple files or folders using the wizard. Another way we can do restores is by mounting a recovery point. I'm going to cancel this, and I'll exit this restore wizard. And I might just close this agent window. If I want to mount a recovery point, what I can do is on any machine that has the Arcserve UDP agent, I can mount a backup or a recovery point to it. So in this example, I'm going to connect to my Demo 01 box. So this is my Demo 01 server. This is running Windows Server 2012 R2. And you can see here I've got the Arcserve UDP agent installed on it. And if I right-click on that icon, I can click on Mount Recovery Point. So when I do that, it'll actually connect to the agent on that machine. I'll put my username and password in. And this time, what it's doing is it's showing me the backups available for this particular machine. You can see at the top, any mounted recovery points already on the machine are listed. It's empty in this case because I don't have anything mounted at this point. In the middle here, it's showing me the backups for demo 01. Now, if I wanted to change this and look at data from another machine, I can click on this change button. And maybe I want to look at the recovery points for that file server. So we can see here on the right, we'll just go to the next page and see if file 01 is here. File 01's not here because that's actually backing up to a different recovery point server. So I can actually put a different recovery point server detail in even. If I log into that, you can see here RPS 02 data store 1, and there's my file server, file 01. I'm going to say OK to that. And now we can see the calendar with the different backups available for file 01. So let's say I wanted to get data from last Friday. I'll choose the 22nd. And then maybe I want to mount this D drive. So if I click on Mount, what it's going to do, ask me what drive letter I want, or if I want to mount it as a folder. But I'm happy to use that drive, and I'll go OK. So what it will do now is it'll mount that recovery point. That D drive will appear as Z drive on this server, on this demo 01 box. You can see here, Z drive is my source D. And if I open Windows Explorer, there is my Z drive, which contains my recovery point for that file server. And I can go into these, so I might go into my sources directory. There's my side-by-side different Windows installer files. I might go back. So I've got my documents, for example, and I can drag and drop and open these files and access them however I want, as if it was a local disk. Once I've done with the restore, I come back, and it's important that I dismount the recovery point. It's important to dismount because while the recovery point is mounted, you've essentially locked that recovery point, meaning that if you have any further backups that run, you'll be stopping the merging of the older recovery point, meaning you'll keep using up disk space until you actually do dismount the recovery point. We'll hit dismount just to also let you know, if the server that has a recovery point mounted reboots, it will automatically release and dismount the recovery point. Now that I've dismounted that, if I go back to Windows Explorer, you'll notice that I no longer have a Z drive in the Windows Explorer view. So I can close this. So that's how we can do a mounting of a recovery point. Let's quickly take a look at how to do a SQL and Exchange database restore. I'm going to go back to the UDP console. So I'll minimize this. There's my UDP console. I have a SQL server here. So I'm going to right-click on it, and I'm going to click on Restore. When I do that, I'll get a few options for restore. We saw this earlier where we can do find files or browse recovery points. To do a database restore for SQL or Exchange, we do the browse recovery point view. If we click on that, again, we've got the different backups that are available, and we've got the same drive letters that are available if we wanted to restore files or folders. But because this is a SQL server, and I'm using Arcserve UDP Advanced or higher, I also see this SQL Server Writer entry. If I expand this, I can actually choose which database or databases I want to restore. So maybe I want to restore Northwind. I select the database and click Next. I can then choose to restore to the original location, dump the database, or restore to an alternative location. I can then go Next. It gives me the summary again, and if I hit Finish, it'll perform the restore for the SQL database. I'll just cancel this, and I'll close this. To do an Exchange database restore, it's pretty much done the same way. Here's my Exchange server. I'm going to right-click on it and click on Restore. I'm going to do Browse Recovery Points, like I did with SQL. And you can see I've got my drive letters like I did before, but this time instead of having the SQL writer, I have the Exchange writer. And I can expand this out, just like I did with SQL. And I can choose which database I want to restore. I'll go Next. I have the option to restore to the original location, to dump it, or to restore to a recovery database. I can then click Next. I have the summary screen again, and when I hit Finish, it'll perform the restore. Now for Exchange, oftentimes doing an Exchange database restore is not required or even desired. You only want to access perhaps a certain person's mailbox to get an individual email or a contact or a calendar item, etc. So to do that, we actually have an Exchange Granular Restore tool available that lets us restore those individual items. To do an Exchange Granular Restore, first of all, what we need to do is mount the recovery point to a server that contains the Exchange database, the EDB file. And the good news is it doesn't have to be the Exchange server itself, but you can use a different machine to do this. I'm going to go back to my Demo 01 box, and if I close this screen, when you install the Arcserve UDP agent, it installs the Arcserve Exchange Granular Restore tool at the same time. So if I open my Start menu, and if I go to my Arcserve section here, you'll notice I have an Arcserve UDP Granular Restore tool. So I can open this. And it'll ask to connect to an Exchange database. Now I haven't mounted my Exchange database yet, so I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to minimize this for a moment, and I'm going to go back to my Arcserve UDP tray icon. I'm going to right-click and click on Mount Recovery Point. So again, I'll provide my credentials and I'll log into the agent on this Demo 01 machine. And what I want to do is I want to mount the drive from the Exchange backup that contains the Exchange database. Again, the top part shows already mounted volumes. I have none. The middle here shows the backups for Demo 01 because by default, it shows you the machine you've logged into. I want to change this, so I'll click on Change, and I want to connect to the Exchange server backups. So here I can click on Exchange. If I say OK, here are my Exchange backups available, and maybe I want to restore from the 930 backup. And this backup here has got system reserve volume, a D drive, and a C drive available. I know my Exchange database is on the D drive, so I'm going to mount this D drive. I'm going to mount it as Z. I'm happy with that. It's an available drive letter. I'll go OK. So after a few seconds, that will be mounted. You can see here that Z drive is mounted, and it's mounted the D drive from my backup. If I open Windows Explorer on this Demo 01 box, I have Z drive, which is called Data, and if I open this, I can actually drill down and find the folder that contains my Exchange database. So what I'm going to do, I can now see that my Exchange database is available on that mounted volume. I'm going to minimize this agent screen. I'm going to come back to my Exchange Granular Restore tool. I can click on Open, and I can now browse down to my Z drive, and I can go down to the folder that I want and mount and open that particular database. Alternatively, if I'm not exactly sure where the Exchange database is on the drive, instead of clicking Open, I can click on File and then search for files to open. If I do this, I can choose the drive letter, so Z drive in this case. I'm searching for Exchange EDB files, and I'm going to hit Start Search. So we can see here that it's actually found 3 different EDB files. The one that I want is the middle one. You can see here that it's created in 2014, and it has the newest date modified. So this is the machine that I want, or the database I want. After I select that, I click on Open File, and it will then go ahead and process that database and show us the content. So once it's done that, we can see, I'm just going to maximize this restore tool. You can see the different mailboxes that are available on the left. So if I go to expand one of those mailboxes, it'll show you the different folders. So here you might have contacts, you might have different tasks. If I had calendar items, they'd be listed here. And of course, emails. So you can see here, I have a lot of these different reports that have come through to this email address, this account. And if I'm not sure which email I want to restore, I can actually click on one of the emails, and it will show me a preview of what the email content is. Once I choose what I want to restore, so maybe I want to restore some emails here, I then have 2 options. I can click the Save button, and it will export these into a PST. If I click on that, I choose where I want to save it and which encoding I want to use. Alternatively, I can click on the icon next to it here to restore it back into the live Exchange database. So if I click on this, there's my Exchange server. And then I have the option to hit export, and it will then restore it into the live Exchange database. So that's the Exchange Granular Restore tool. Once I'm done with my restore, I can close the Exchange Restore tool. And then just as before, it's important that I come back and I dismount the recovery point. So I'm going to click on Dismount. Yes, I want to dismount. So that's gone. I can open Windows Explorer and double check. And you can see there that Z drive is no longer listed in the listed drive. So I can close this. I can close the agent, And that's how I can do granular restore for Exchange. The last thing I want to take a look at is how to do Active Directory object and object attribute restores. So to do that, I'm going to go back to the Arcserve UDP console, and my domain controller is here called DC01, and I'm going to right-click on that and click on Restore. Just as before, it's going to open the agent on the target machine, in this case my domain controller, and I have the same options that I had before: browse recovery points, find files or folders, and so on. The last item on the list here is called Restore Active Directory, and that's what I want to click. When I open this, I have, just as before, the calendar with the different available recovery points, and instead of actually having the drive letters or the different writers, I have the Active Directory item here. So if I want to restore something from a few days ago, I might choose whichever date that I want, select the Active Directory, and then click Next. That'll then load the AD contents. And after a few seconds, I can choose the different objects and the attributes and choose what I want to restore. So for example, I might choose my domain here. Maybe I want to take a look at the different users. So I'll select users. And then here are the different user accounts. So I don't want to do all users. I might want to do my account here. And then maybe you want to restore the entire user account. Or perhaps you only want to restore a particular attribute of that user account. Maybe members, you want to restore what members they were part of. Or you want to restore different names and so on. Given name, display name. So you have the ability to do these different restores. So I might select something here. I might just restore the display name. And if I go next, I then have options on what to do for conflicts, whether I'm restoring or skipping. Once I select those items, I go next and I have my summary like I had before. And then I can click Finish and it'll perform the restore into the AD. So you can see here with restores, most of the restores are done using the Arcserve UDP agent. We also saw how you don't have to be on the same box every time. If you have the Arcserve UDP agent installed on a local machine, you can actually access any recovery point from other servers through your machine as well. So you don't have to do the restore on the same box. There's a lot of flexibility in how we can perform those restores, and we have access to full images as well as file, folders, and application data. I'm just going to go back. That pretty much has gone through the demo for today's session. As I mentioned, today's session is the first of a new 3-part series, and in the next webinar we'll actually go through how to perform offsite data retention with Arcserve UDP replication. We'll see how we can perform virtual standby and instant VM as well. We can create powered off offline VMs using a recovery point as the image so that we can turn them on in case something happens to the source box. Maybe we want to create a VM from a very old image, an old backup that we have. We can do that with instant VM. So we're going to go through and show how all of that works in the next webinar, which is in 2 weeks' time on Friday, the 12th of August. If you haven't registered for that already, there's a tiny URL link there, and it's basically tinyurl/UDP features webinar 2. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to register. If you have any colleagues who might be interested in the same, recommend you to share that link with them as well. Just before we conclude, I just want to say a happy Sysadmin Day to everyone. Today, Friday the 29th of July, is actually the 17th annual System Administrator Appreciation Day. Now, to celebrate this, and in the spirit of this, for today only, Friday the 29th of July, Arcserve is offering 2 months of unlimited access to Arcserve UDP version 6 Premium Plus features for all new users. And when we say unlimited, unlimited infrastructure, unlimited data capacity, unlimited number of company sites, source and target machines. If you register, you'll get the ability to use that in any country immediately. So if you're a new user and you're interested in looking at and using Arcserve UDP, I definitely encourage you to register. So we've got a tiny URL link here, Arcserve Sysadmin Day, and that will let you put your credentials and your details in, I should say, and register for that, and we can email you out a license key to use for that 2 months. With that, if you're interested in any more information, if you're after a deep dive or you want a more customized demo or interested to go into it in more detail, definitely please feel free to reach out to us. You can contact myself and my colleague Andrew Huntley. Our details are on the screen there, both our email and phone numbers. And I'll leave them on screen for a little while, and we'll take a look if there are any questions here. So we've got a question about doing DMR in the cloud. As a native feature, a native capability, because we need to mount a recovery point, recovery ISO, generally speaking, DMR in the cloud is not something we offer right now. There are features being worked on to bring that functionality in, but for now, DMR requires you to mount an ISO or plug a USB key in. So generally speaking, you need to have access to the virtualization layer to perform a bare metal restore. That said, we can perform high availability in the cloud if you need to do failover. So some of that functionality is available. Some private cloud providers, such as Telstra CSX, as well as SoftLayer and the like, do have capabilities for us to perform DMR. So got a question asking about support for Exchange 2016 and REFS, or the Resilient File System. With Arcserve UDP version 6, we added support for Exchange 2016, so that's definitely supported, and that includes Exchange 2016 DAG. On top of that, Arcserve UDP has, since Arcserve UDP first launched a few years ago, we've actually supported the REFS file system. So we definitely support that for the with Arcserve UDP for Exchange and just REFS in general. This applies for both the software implementation of Arcserve UDP, so if you're using your own RPS server, or if you want to use the Arcserve UDP appliance, both the software and appliance support Exchange 2016, REFS, and more. The DMR that I showed was for Windows, but we also have a DMR process for Linux. The Linux process is very similar. The only requirement we have over and above is we need to have a Red Hat or a CentOS or a SUSE Linux machine, which can be a VM, to act as our restore process, because that Linux server is one that will send the restore data to our target machine. Another questions come through about restoring emails to live Exchange servers. Absolutely. So the ability to restore, you saw we had a save button on the Exchange Granular restore tool. The save button saves to a PST, and you can then open that within Outlook. Or you also have the button next to it, which lets you restore into the live Exchange running Exchange server. You can do restores on emails, contacts, calendar items, to-do items, and more. Okay, so if there are any other questions, please feel free to type them in. If you think of something afterwards, by all means, please feel free to get in touch with us. We're more than happy to answer any questions you may have afterwards. But for today, I'd like to thank you for attending today's session. I'd like to thank you for your attention. And as I said, we do have our next webinar in the series in 2 weeks' time. And I encourage you to register for that and attend if you're interested in replication, virtual standby, or instant VM. But until then, thank you again, and we'll hope to see you next time. Thanks.